Hey guys, my name is Mannequin and welcome back to Mastering EDM with Logic Pro. So I have good news and bad news. Good news is, well, actually let's start with the bad news. Bad news is today is not on compression. Good news is that's because I'm actually going to be meeting with a audio engineer and he's going to be giving me some pointers on some things that I'm not too certain about when it comes to compression for mastering, mainly multi-band compression for mastering. I'm not very good at that, so I was going to kind of hang out with him next week and get some advice from him, and I might even try to do an interview with him and kind of get share some other thoughts on some other topics that he has with you guys. So just kind of, so you could get from someone actually who works in the industry and has worked in the industry for years and years and years and years, and just kind of hear some thoughts from him. Hopefully I can do that. It kind of just depends how much time we end up having. So today is on bouncing, and I realize there's something I didn't cover in my earlier videos that I really should have covered, and that is the advanced tools. I am going to go back and annotate some of my videos and talk about these tools, but you'll want to know, just for the sake of this video, there's one thing that I need to point out in order for us to get everything to work right. Okay, so we're going to go here, File, Logic, Preferences, and we're going to go to Advanced Tools here. If that doesn't show up, I don't know if it will for you guys, just click on General, and then we'll go to Advanced here. And then we'll have a whole bunch of options here that these will all be unchecked if you are running a fresh install of Logic Pro X. Then you'll want to check all of these if you haven't already, and so that will show all the advanced options, and these actually, I'm definitely going to have to go through because I know there are some things like you can't use folders unless you check these, I believe, and things like that. So you'll really want to have all these checked in order to have the full potential of Logic unlocked. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to Audio, General, and then we're going to go to Sample Accurate Automation and make sure this is set to the bottom one, which has all of these. Now, what this does is if you zoom in and you look at automation, find something that's automated here, and you'll see here that it starts, right here. So we have a piece of automation that starts right here. And as the playhead's walking by here, when you're playing it back, it'll notice that automation start to change, and it'll start to change the parameter. However, if you don't have the sample precise automation running for everything, then what'll happen is some things will trail behind. So it'll get to here and it'll say, oh, we're starting to change the value. And then it starts to change the value to what this next sample is at by the time it gets to here. So there's kind of like a delay here, and that can be a problem for some things. So, and I'll show you mainly what that is later. Okay, so I'm gonna get rid of this automation here, and then we're gonna go to bounce. If you don't see bounce, it's probably because you're on a track that is not directly linked up to the master channel. It's like bus 3 here, you'll see, and then it goes to stereo out. So just find a track that's got runs directly to stereo out, and you'll see bounce here. Or you could hit Command B, or you could go File, Bounce, Bounce, Project, or Section. So I'm just going to hit Command B, popped up that window, and we have a whole lot of options here. And I talked about normalization. I didn't really talk about many other things. Okay, so we're going to go through some of the most basic things here first, and then we'll kind of clear things out. So start is 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay, that's kind of obvious. That's the start of our project. End is variable. It can change depending on one factor, and actually two factors, sorry. The first factor is where is the end of your project set to? This one is set to 18.111. And that's because I have this little marker here, or if you notice, this thing also changes it. I could actually pull it up or down. And so that's the end of my project, and this is the end of our project. Notice that your display up here is going to be different from mine because I made a custom one. And I think I kind of touched on how to do that in optimizing your workflow and arranging things. But my layout is slightly different from your guys' if you're still running the default layout. So that's probably why you see something slightly different. But this is the project end. If you have the custom band up and you kind of show, actually, it might just be worth customize control bar and display. This is what I have. So you could pause the video here and kind of, if you want to have the exact same layout as me, then you'll want to choose these. And then what you'll do is click Save as Default. And then you could actually have this every time you pop open. So, okay. Where was I? Okay, so that's the end. The other thing that can change it is if you select a section and click bounce, it'll set it to actually that section here. So this start point is 1 to 5. So you'll notice 1 to 5. It runs it to the selected section, which is not what I want. So I'm not going to select anything, and then it'll automatically set it to the end. Now you can manually change these numbers, but for the most part, using those two tools is kind of the easiest way to just automatically catch the end. So this is where the automation thing comes key. Mode, real time, and offline. Offline is what I would suggest you do just because it's higher quality and it's less prone to glitches, and because it just kind of renders it per se. So it's not actually going to play the music back. It's just going to kind of save it based on, it's going to run through the synthesizer's routines and all the processing and then figure out, how to do it. So that's what offline does, and it just kind of saves the file and then you're good. Real time, on the other hand, is very different. It plays it back and records it as it plays back. If you're running automation and your automation is not set to sample precise, it's gonna sound different when you run it in real time than when you run it in offline. Because real time, it'll play with that automation with a little bit of a delay on the automation, but offline, it'll make it sample precise. So that's why you want to set it to sample precise. Now, it does take more computing power to run everything sample precise, but you kind of just need to deal with it in EDM because you want everything to be really dead on and accurate. So that's why you want to make sure it's sample precise. If it's not sample precise and some of your tracks are still, you're having that issue where whenever you bounce it, the automation is different, then just bounce it in real time. Bounce second cycle pass is just to kind of get higher quality, I think, for bouncing in real time. I don't use that because I always bounce in real or offline. Okay. So now include audio tail. That's just when you get to the end here, do you include whatever it trails off after that? I typically just have, plenty of extra room after my project and just turn that off. Because if you just set this to the end of your project and then you turn on include audio tail, what will happen sometimes is it'll stop playing this audio file when you get to this line if you set this line as your end. But the reverb and all the processing after that, it'll include. So that's kind of a little bit of a problem if you kind of set that there. I think it did that in Logic 9. I don't know if it does that in Logic 10 still. But I just kind of leave tons of extra room and then don't include the audio tail because I don't need to. Okay. So now, this is for the fun part. We already talked about normalization in one of my earlier videos. If you're just jumping into this video to kind of figure out audio formats and stuff like that, then you'll want to go back to my first mastering video because I talk about normalization because it's a really long discussion and there's a lot to cover by way of that. So I'm not going to reiterate anything here except for the fact that I have normalization off because I have tons of headroom. So now the different formats: PCM, MP3, M4A, and burn to CD DVD. I am just going to say I'm not going to cover this, partially because I have no CD burner, so I can't access these settings. So if you see I try to click it, sorry, no drives were found. So I can't actually burn to CD DVD, and quite honestly, I'd rather just burn it to a WAV file or save it to a WAV file and then copy that WAV file to a CD anyway. So I just talked about a WAV file, which means I need to go through kind of what these different formats are. The PCM stands for like pulse code modulation or something like that. You really don't need to know what that means. Essentially, this is the highest quality one. This is MP3 and this is M4A. MP3 is the most popular audio file format out there. M4A is the one that Apple uses. And quite frankly, I don't like that because I don't like the way Apple works with their DRM protection and stuff like that. But whatever. For all intents and purposes, don't use this because you really don't need to. And then, so you'll usually just be running PCM and MP3. So we'll start with PCM and then we'll work to MP3. Okay, so this one's pretty difficult. We have file formats, which is kind of obvious here. We have WAV, AIFF, and CAF. Those are just three different formats you can kind of run in. Most audio software I've run into can support these. Although the one that is by far most universal is WAV. WAV works on almost everything. So that's what I usually bounce it at. This is kind of like Windows high quality audio, and then this one's like Mac high quality audio. Essentially, they're the exact same quality. It's just a matter of what formatting is it in. So I choose WAV because that's what pretty much everything runs on these days. You'll notice that if you download samples, they're going to be in WAV. So now we have resolution and sample rate, and this is where things get difficult. Okay, so I was going to try to draw out all this, but I think I'll just kind of show you with a little bit of drawing. Or a little bit of drawing and a little bit of what's in Logic. So if you pop open an audio file in Logic, you'll notice that we have this kind of, audio thing that you see all the time. Now, if I zoom in, is actually pretty cool. You kind of see it goes like that. And you can kind of see it's these basically just a whole bunch of waves bouncing up and down. And now this is smoothed. So you can kind of see, no matter how much I zoom in, it still kind of looks like a smooth wave. But everything is kind of like this little wave thingy. And now, on an interesting note, if I zoom in here, on the other hand, and zoom in like this, you'll notice it looks all jagged. That's because this one's not smooth. This is what audio is. So you kind of pull it up. You kind of see here. If I zoom into the same spot right at the beginning here, let's see if I can do this. I think it is actually zooming in at the beginning. There we go. So we have, these are basically the same wave. It's the same wave. It's just the difference is that this one is not smooth. This is what it kind of actually looks like when the computer's reading it. This is what it looks like to you. So the question is, how do we choose the quality? So long story short, without going into all the physics of it, this is essentially here. The resolution is how many slices there are this way. So you'll notice that sometimes it does a small jump, sometimes it does a large jump. And essentially what we're doing is we're choosing how many horizontal slices to put in it. So we have our wave. Actually, I don't want that green. We're going to just make this black. So we have our wave here. Whoops. And then we have the slices that we could do. So I'm going to set this to our blue will be our horizontal slices. So you'll notice that if I run 2 slices across this entire thing, we have 2 points that it could be at. So if I'm running along and I'm just kind of choosing, okay, so I need to save this wave into a digital format. I can't save it as a wave because that's not like, computers can't handle that. They need it in numbers. So I just I have 2 options. I have 1 and 0. So now I could go through it as I'm playing this back and kind of saving the file. I say, okay, this one's at 0, and then this one's at 1, and this one's at 0, and you notice I'm kind of arbitrarily choosing points. But sometimes, we'll talk about this later, but when we start to get into the vertical cuts, sometimes it'll say, find a point here, like vertically here. And you'll say, okay, well, there's no point. So we have to round things. We have to take this one, and instead of being that high, it's actually going to be sucked down all the way to here. So we're going to have a point here, and then we'll say the next point's here. So it's kind of in between these two. So it's like, okay, so where do I put this one? I have to round it either up or down. And then you kind of got to figure out where the heck you're going to put it. Now, computers do things, they do things very mathematically. So if it's exactly halfway, then it'll be rounded up. If it's just above halfway, it'll be rounded up. They won't choose the one that makes sense. So instead of trying to follow a pattern like this, if it just happens to land right here and it chooses a spot that's just above halfway, it'll actually put something right here. So this makes less sense than doing something that goes up and then back down. So that's kind of why you need to have a lot more of these slices. Because as you add slices, you could really start to see that you have a lot more options for where the audio sample can be at. So if I went here now, instead of just choosing 1 or 0, I could actually choose whatever ends up being closest to it. So like right here, we'll say I need to choose something, so I could jump down to there. And then now, when I get to this part, I could actually go all the way up here instead of down here. And then as I go on, I could just follow this process. When I get halfway, I will still have to move it to whatever one's closest. But at the same time, it's closer than just having 1 and 0. So that's where these different depths come in. So it's how many slices can we get vertically. So now we hop back into logic here. We can kind of see this looks pretty darn jagged. Realistically, this looks jagged because of the main reason is I've zoomed in so much that we're actually looking at the individual samples. So each little line here is one sample. And then we can kind of see, okay, what value is this sample at? And this sample, despite the fact that it looks all chunky, if I zoom it in like this, actually let me cancel it so I can zoom it in. If I zoom it in like this, you'll notice that these can actually have a lot more values in between. It's just a matter of where are the samples, where are they located. So this one, if I made this cut smaller, I could have 2 that are like very subtle changes there. And you'll notice that some of these are very subtle changes. Like right here, there's a very slight change between these 2 samples. So we have a lot of resolution. And that's because we're running this at 16-bit. I know this sample is at 16-bit. Now, there's 8-bit and 24-bit. When would you use those? 8-bit you use if you want a really, really tiny file, because a 8-bit file is 2 to the 8th, and that actually means you have 256 values that you could potentially choose. So from here, from basically the minimum value to the maximum value, there's 256 potential values you could have it at. On the other hand, when you go to 16-bit, watch this. You have 65,000. That's a lot more to work with. So instead of just having like 200, if you made 200 slices here, you could actually see the slice lines. But if you made 65,000 slice lines here, you wouldn't be able to see them. It'd just kind of be like a solid color because there'd be so many slice lines. I mean, I have, just kind of put it into perspective, most of the screens nowadays have only a couple thousand pixels. So if we got this, put it in 8-bit, then 256 would probably take up actually about, if you lined up every single pixel on your screen, it'd probably go from here to here. You know, just for general screens. If you have a really high quality screen like on the new Macs, then it'll probably be a smaller region, like from here to about here, instead of all that region. So kind of like, let's say from this line to the top of this box would be for my screen, and for your guys' screen it's probably like somewhere around there. But that's if you lined up all the pixels, it'd be that much. So it's kind of like quantifiable. It fits on your screen. And actually, I just kind of realized it's probably a really crappy estimation because I think 200 pixels is probably a lot bigger. But anyway, doesn't matter. It could fit on your screen. If you made a 256 by 256 pixel block, you'd have this nice square in your screen. It might take up a bit of space, but you'd have this nice square. When we stick it to 16, there is no computer screen in existence that I know of that has 65,000 pixels vertically. The really expensive screens nowadays run, I don't know, I think it's like 4,000 vertically. So trying to fit that many pixels, it'd be like a square that'd fit like probably, I don't know, most screens are 2,000, so that's what, 65,000 divided by 2? Do the math. That'd be like a lot of your screens stacked up just to try to get that number of pixels to fit. So that's how many slices it would be. So instead of just having like a nice number of countable slices, you'd have a lot of slices. Then what happens when we get to 24-bit? 24-bit, 16 million slices. That's quite a lot. And at that point, it kind of just becomes irrelevant. So then the way things work is 8-bit is for really low quality audio. A lot of children's toys and stuff like that use 8-bit, and that's where that terrible airy like kind of audio sound comes from. It's because they're using 8-bit, and there's a lot of missed data there. And a 16-bit is what probably all of your music that you have runs in. And because that's just it's got tons of resolution. You can choose tons of values with very subtle changes, and it'll still catch it. 24-bit is what is used for mixing. Excuse me. And the reason for this is because despite the fact that you have really high resolution with 16-bit, what happens if you go to manipulate that audio? Like if you go to compress it, do you have the maximum resolution possible? And because when you start to compress things, you're kind of changing values instead of just taking the original values and playing it back. So that's when you would use 24-bit. So in my case, I'm going to set it to 24-bit for this one because I'm going to bring it in and do some mastering. So that means I'm going to EQ and do some compression and stuff like that. And so that means that having it 24-bit is actually worthwhile because we're going to be doing manipulation to it. For playback, nobody can tell the difference between 16-bit and 24-bit. That's just kind of the way it works. Some people say they can, but it's kind of the general consensus on the internet that nobody can tell the difference between 16-bit and 24-bit. So when you're playing it back, when you save it after you're done mastering it, you'll save it in 16-bit because that's what everyone's going to be listening to. 8-bit's too low. 24-bit just makes a massive file that's like really huge because you notice. This is each slice of your little, because we kind of made a grid here. We're going to start making more of a grid in a second here. But each slice, the more lines you add, the more data it has to save. So when we go into this one and we set it to 24-bit and we have millions of potential locations per slice, it kind of increases the file size rather quickly. So you only set it to 24 when you're doing audio work on the file that you're saving. But when you go to just for playback, set it to 16. So so that I'm going in to master it, so I'm going to 24, but once I'm done mastering it, I'll bring it down to 16 so that people can listen to it and not have to get like a 200 megabyte file for an audio clip. Okay, sample rate. This one is where we start to get to the other half. So you notice these little squares here. If I shrink the view here, and you kind of see that the width of these little slices shrinks. Each one of those is a sample, and as I shrink it, you'll notice it kind of looks like it's higher quality. So that's what's kind of going on here with these samples. When we go to bounce, we're choosing how many slices we want per second, I believe. So this is 44,100 slices per second. This one's 48,000, and this one's 192,000. Which one do you use? Okay, for all audio work in the music industry, you run it at 44,100. In the video industry, you run it at 48,000. I don't know when you would run it at 192,000. I think that's like if you're a major studio and you're recording or something like that. But long story short, this is not something you should be changing. You should always set this to 44,100 if you're doing music. Now, the reason you don't want to set it to a higher one first, like you'll think, okay, so I'll set it to 24-bit, then I'll set it to 192,000, and then I'll go into master it, and then this file will be like a gigabyte, which is insane for music. But actually, it probably might be. I'm curious. I just want to bounce this down, see how long it takes. But kind of, you're like, okay, I'll go the highest one, then I'll go to master it, and then I'll bring it down to 16, and then 44,100. That's what I'll do for the final master. But for now, since we're going into master, I want to have the highest. Actually, here we go. It says it's going to be 400 megabytes. Nope, that's not right. It says 455,000 kilobytes. I guess it is kind of like 15 seconds of audio. I don't know. We have to see. I don't trust them. Okay, so, but you don't want to do this because the way sample rate works is when you try to downsample sample rate, things don't line up correctly. I could try to show you this, but I don't know how well it'll work. Now, essentially, as you're playing this back, you'll notice that each time you hit a new value, it's going to change. So the playhead's going through, it's choosing the value to play back through your speakers, and each sample is kind of like, each sample has a certain value and a certain place in time. So we go back into Sketchbook here, and we can start keying in the time, and we'll make the time green. So what happens is we could actually potentially get a bad setup here. And what I mean by that is, let's say the start point is right here. Because that makes sense, that's the start point. Whoops, that was terrible. Yep, there we go. And then we're going to go through and we're going to do, we're going to run this first at 100 and, or not 140. We're going to run it at 48,000 first. And then we're going to do this differently in a second here. So we're running at 48,000, and so we have these slices like this. There we go. We have these nice slices, and then we're gonna run it, and in red will be 44.1 kHz. Okay, so that's basically another way of writing 44,100 hertz, or the what do they call it here? The sample rate. Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of just another way to write it. 44.1 kilohertz. So now we're gonna run it in red here. It starts at the same spot, so we're gonna actually start at this point here. And we're just going to put it right there so you kind of see both. They're both overlapping. Now, 44.1, on the other hand, is going to kind of go like this because it's slightly bigger than the other one. And then that one would be about, what, here? And then here or something like that. I don't know. Okay. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the higher sample rate and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the lower sample rate. Now, where does the problem arise? This is where things start to get confusing, so bear with me. So we know that it starts here, and then if we run it at a higher sample rate, you'll notice we could go up. The green one is the higher sample rate. So we'll say that our grid will snap to here for this sample in particular. I want to focus on this sample. Now, what happens when you go to downscale this to 44,100? This point gets moved to here. Which, if you notice on the red line, if I would have rendered that one in 44,100 at first, it would actually be right here. So, so what we end up with is when we actually downsample the sample rate and we bring it down, we actually lose a lot more data than if we were to just kind of round the values on the vertical slices to the next one. So, because for this one, we're actually getting the wrong value. Now, this becomes a lot more present in the high end because the high end is very sharp things. So what happens if, in a better example here, we have a very sharp point here, and then we'll say the 44,000, what it would normally catch is it'd catch here and then here right at that point. So we get, actually that was a bad line there. Here we'll start it here and we'll catch a second one here. So we get this point right here and this point right here. Now, what happens when we run it at a higher sample rate is there's a potential that we could get something like this. We run the first line here, and then we run the next line here and the next line here. So that's very close, so it kind of doesn't show, but there we go. That'll be better. And then the next line here. So those are very close, but if you zoom in, you'll see something like this. You'll have this point here, and the green one will be grabbing points here and here, and the red one will be grabbing the point here. And then, so what you'll end up with is you'll end up with it generating a wave that is resulted like this when you downsample it instead of from here, the same starting point for all of them, to here for the 44,100 one. So that's why you don't want to mess with that and choose the wrong format, because it actually causes a lot of potential problems. So that was a long discussion about something you probably didn't need to know. Okay, so that's why you don't, I just kind of wanted to tell you guys the reasons behind it, because I don't want to just say don't do it, because then you guys don't know what's going on. You just kind of, know that you're not supposed to do it. So we know the reason that we choose the resolutions that we choose. So I'm choosing 24-bit for this one. And then for the sample rate, I'm choosing 44,100 because, like I said, if I choose something higher than that and scale it down, there's a chance that I could potentially screw things up. Now, this is more important for when you're doing something like 48,000 instead of 44,000. It makes a bigger difference. If you're actually running at 192,000 and then you scale that down to 44,000, what you'll end up with is you'll actually end up with about the same amount of accuracy at 44,100, just because the way this one's so high resolution, you can actually afford to scale it down. But this one, it'll actually cause issues if you render at this one and then scale it down later. So that's why some studios work at such a high resolution here for this one, but most of the time you're running it at this one. Part of the reason you run at this one too is because, oh, my throat's getting sore. Part of the reason you run at this one too is because most devices play it back at this speed anyway. I don't know any device that doesn't nowadays, actually. So it'll be in a question whether or not a phone or something can support 48 kilohertz instead of 44.1 kilohertz. But almost every single device that plays back audio runs it at 44.1 kilohertz. I'm just gonna stop saying 44,100 because that's so annoying. Okay, so 44.1 kilohertz is what we'll say. And so anyway, those are the two things that you need to know that are really confusing. File type. This one's kind of confusing because you don't know what the heck that word means sometimes. But this is essentially, do you want it to render the left and right audio separately, or do you want to have in two different files? Oh, sorry about that. In two different files. Do you want to have it in two different files, which is split, or do you want to have it in one file? So I typically just do this just because, if it's a stereo file, I can split the left side and the right side when I go to master anyway by just like using pan or something like that. So I don't see any reason to actually split the audio files, but sometimes a mastering engineer will say, give me a split files. So then you want to split it, and then you'll have one that's the left side and one that's the right side. Dithering. Dithering is another important topic, and it has everything to do with this nice little grid that we've made. So you'll notice that when we shrink things down, I kind of talked about it before, sometimes you get the wrong value. Now, dithering deals with the fact that we don't use this wave format all the time. If you buy from Beatport, you'll probably notice that they use wave. But if you buy from any other store online, you'll probably notice that most of them use MP3. So what is dithering? Dithering adds noise to your project. That sounds pretty bad. The fact that you're adding noise to a project and you're like reducing the quality per se. Yes, you are actually reducing the quality by doing this. But what you're doing is you're reducing it by a nearly inaudible amount. And as a matter of fact, what this does is it saves the audio quality when going down. Now, I'm going to have to credit someone on this one. Give me a second. I'm going to pop open an image here. Okay, so I got the image here. Pull it up. This is what dithering does. So you'll notice that at 24-bit, this image looks really smooth. But when we shrink it down to 8-bit, it looks nasty. You've got like these really weird kind of rays instead of this nice gradient. So what do? We add this random noise into the original image. So when we go down to, and when we shrink it down to 8-bit, it's been dithered. So it kind of, despite the fact that it only has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colors, it's actually bouncing between those 6 colors and kind of alternating. You could see, if I take this image, pull it up here, and then zoom in a lot, you'll notice this one bounces a lot between the different values that this one could potentially have, which fools our eyes into thinking that this is a nicer looking image than this one when they have the same number of colors. This one has a lot higher number of colors. So first of all, you can't really see the dithering in it. And if you can, it's because it's a low resolution image that has been downscaled and dithered. But otherwise, you won't, if this was the original image, you wouldn't be able to see the noise that's added. You'd just be able to see it when it's been dithered down here. You'd see, you see when it's dithered and you shrink it down to 8-bit instead of 24-bit. So kind of like when I said we go to bounce something and we're going to run it at 24-bit for our master, and then we'll shrink it down to 16-bit when we go down to the final save. We have to dither it in that process. So what am I going to do right now? I am not going to dither because I am bouncing it for the master. I want to master it in the highest quality with nothing bad in it. Once I'm done mastering, on the other hand, what I'll do is I'll change these settings to 16, and then I'll add some dithering. Which one to use? That's a very good question. And you'll actually notice here that if you have it 24-bit, you cannot use this type of dithering. And if you run it 16, you can use this one, which really just shows you that you should only use the dithering to go down from 24 to 16. So which one to use? Quite honestly, I've heard there's a lot of different algorithms behind these, and they're better suited for different things and everything like that. And this one's like a famous dithering some algorithm or so. I don't know. Just use one. Just because realistically, like I said, does it really matter to you if I go back to this image? In this article, by the way, I just want to credit. This is Ian Shepherd. He does some really good stuff on mastering, if I recall correctly. I don't know if he covers mixing techniques as well. I think he does some. But Ian Shepherd is really good, and he's actually, I think I heard a lot about him from Joe Gilder as well. But they're really good guys in talking about mixing and mastering, not by way of EDM. They're talking about the more classic styles of recording music and mixing those. But this is really great here. So it really just shows you, like, when you go in and dither something, the dithering algorithm, like how well does it do this, and where does it add the speckles, where does it not add the speckles. That's basically all you're changing there. So it doesn't really matter all that much. If you really care, just try it. Bounce your track with 1, 2, and 3 and figure out which one you like best. Quite honestly, I can't hear any difference between them. So you know, like I said, just kind of choose one and then it'll work. So like I said, since I'm going into actually bounces for the master, I'm going to set this to none. And this would essentially be when I'm going into master, what should I do? So I'm grabbing this and I'm going to go in and actually save this. Now, I think later on I'll talk about more about the final save, and I'll kind of reiterate on this when we go through the last episode of the series. But I want to briefly cover the two other things here. And I'm not going to really cover just that much, just because you kind of see there's not a lot of settings here. Okay, MP3. MP3 is a lot easier because it kind of already does the math for you. So we have all these slices here, And this essentially translates to how much data you're going to be traveling through your computer every second. So when you're running with a WAV file, you have a lot more control over that because, like I said, there are industry standards that are run. You kind of just got to choose the one that is for your standard. Most common ones you'll see are 44.1 kilohertz, 48 kilohertz, 96 kilohertz, and 192 kilohertz. Although typically you probably won't have gear that could even actually, it depends how expensive your gear is. But most gear can run up to 48 kilohertz. Although some can run up to 96 and a slightly fewer amount can run up to 192 kilohertz. But that's just a little bit of a tangent. So anyway, you have the resolution and sample rate, multiply those two together, and you get the bit rate, which is how many bits you have per second. And it's kind of scaled up to kilobits just because otherwise it'd be an impossibly large number to deal with. So this one's just kind of like how small do you want the file? High quality MP3 files are just use the highest setting. Bitrate mono and stereo, I don't know why it gives us the option. Use variable bitrate encoding can reduce the file size while trying to maintain the quality. I don't check that. Sorry about that. I don't check that just because I prefer to run it at a steady bitrate. And then obviously you could choose the quality of this variable bitrate encoding. But like I said, I usually just run it at a standard one. There are three main formats off the top of my head, or not formats, but bit rates that are kind of used. There's 320, which you'll see a lot in very high quality MP3 music. 256 is used in some high quality music, and 224 as well. These ones are generally high quality. But they're kind of, they're just slightly less than 320 kilobits. It's kind of, there's a little bit of discrepancy as to whether or not you could hear the detail. It's just kind of how tuned your ears are. This one you could actually start to hear the difference when it goes down, though. And then 192 is one that's used, as well as 128, is used a lot for audio streaming online. So these are rather low quality formats, and you're really going to start to hear the effects on the high end mostly, and some of the bass. So I would not set it to these unless someone's asking you to master it down to those files so that they could stream those ones like from a high quality master and then downsample it to one of these. So that's why it's important to have dithering, because if you have dithering on, then you could actually run these lower bit rates and still maintain as much quality as possible without it sounding, without losing data because of that dithering thing. We kind of showed with the image, the wonderful image by Ian Shepherd. And I just realized something really annoying, but I'll fix that later. So, okay, where was I? Okay, so here we go. So now that pretty much covers everything you need to know. Use best encoding. I don't see why you wouldn't want to do that. Filter frequencies below 10 hertz. I mean, we can't hear that, so why not? And then stereo mode, joint stereo or normal. I just leave that on joint stereo. I don't know why. I don't even remember what this does. ID3 tags are kind of like your artist name and everything like that, which is kind of worth doing, but you don't really need to. I mean, you can do it if you want to, but frankly, I don't care. And then you could add to iTunes, which is kind of like, they just kind of, that's an Apple thing there. Add to iTunes, because like you want to add your track to iTunes. No, I don't want to add my track to iTunes. I want to actually be sending it to other people. So anyway, that's kind of what you do for MP3. M4A is the same deal. Advanced audio codec or Apple lossless for your encoding settings. This one's slightly less than this one. Apple lossless is slightly higher quality. And then the bit rate when you run Apple, actually we need to enable this in order to check it, but you kind of see here on advanced audio codec, we could run the bit rate here, but quite frankly, I do not ever suggest you bounce it to M4A just because that's a weird format. And what'll happen is usually you'll send it to a distributor in a WAV format, and then they'll bounce it down to M4A or something. I don't know what iTunes actually does, but yes, essentially you don't have to worry about that. That's more on a management side of things. If somebody asks you to do that when you're releasing a track, then you could do it, but otherwise don't bounce it to this and give it to somebody. It's really annoying. Just do WAV and MP3. Those are the two formats you should run in. Okay, so now that I've talked about everything I could possibly talk about with this topic, oh, painful it is, painful. Then we could actually, go in and bounce this here. So I have this at 24-bit, no dithering. 44.1 kilohertz, and then the two audio files are going to be, or the two sides left and right are going to be set into one file. And then we have wave, and everything should be good here. The end of my project is not that. That's because I had this region selected, so I need to actually unselect the regions here, zoom back out here, just unselect everything, and then I can bounce it, and then it'll automatically have the end correct there. So wave 24-bit, everything's still good, and we're not going to normalize it, so we have a nice headroom. And because we already checked here, you know, you can see it's at -10 when I checked it. So I got tons of headroom now, and I could save this. So I don't want it in final tracks. I actually want to put it in mastering EDM tidbits. There we go. And then we'll go to master. Actually, you'd want to name it something a bit more. Actually, since this is, you'd usually want to name it like track name, I don't know, pre-master or something like that. So that you kind of know what it is and you don't get tracks mixed up because you have them named all the same thing. And then bounce it. And then we have that good. And we can actually check here, see if we can find the file. But no, I'm not going to do that now. There's no real point to go finding the file. But anyway, that's basically everything you could possibly really need to know about the about bouncing stuff. It's a lot of painful details that we could see here. But you know, just suffice it to say that I've given as much of an explanation as you should need. And if I got anything wrong, it's to the point to where it's not really that important. So, you know, like some of the ways the computer deals with these things, I'm not 100% certain about. So it can be like, I could be slightly wrong in some of those regards, but don't worry about it too much. But just, yeah, just, you know, kind of take this generally speaking that you kind of know the two reasons that you bounce it 16 and 24. 8-bit you would never really want to do unless you're trying to do it some audio for kids toy, or you want to see what 8-bit sounds like because it'll probably sound funny. And then sample rate, like I said, is just kind of depending on what source you're having it running on, as well as what industry you're working with. And then everything else is just kind of like, this one is one of the ones that it doesn't really matter all that much. So, oh my goodness, my voice is like going out. Anyway, this was a lot longer video than I was kind of originally expecting. So it's kind of good that I actually made a dedicated video for this instead of trying to cover it in the one of the final videos of this series, like as along with another thing. So I just kind of wanted to talk about this so that you guys have an idea of everything that's going on and you know why you're choosing the settings you're choosing. And you're not just choosing the one that everyone tells you to do. So, whew, man, hope you enjoyed this video. Hope it was helpful for you guys. And as always, I've got more stuff coming, and I'm really wanting to start doing live streaming here. So I'm actually going to set up an account so I can try to live stream some stuff to you guys, because I know some of you guys would really enjoy that. It'll be really chill sessions, and you won't have to worry too much about, you know, me doing, you know, just like do this, and then do this. It's going to be like I'm producing, I'm chatting with you guys, you know, just like about whatever topic happens to come up, as well as whatever questions you may have by way of the audio industry, as far as by way of what I know, and then or production tips, or how to do a particular synthesizer, or just whatever topic comes up. It'll be really chill, and hopefully I can get that running and my internet's fast enough to where I can do live streaming. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next video.